Obsidian Spears Submersion Point. Fed 1. Into the drowned city. The drowned hive loomed ahead like the carcass of some impossible sea beast, its skeletal towers jutting from the grey water in fractured ribs. Rain fell in a steady sheet, streaking down the visor of Sergeant Vicato's helm as the Obsidian Spears stood silent aboard the low-slung assault craft. Behind them, a flotilla of smaller skimmers carried their mortal allies, men of the Hestian amphibious rifles. The guardsmen's craft rode low and quiet, their hulls painted in sea grey and broken with mottled streaks that matched the waterlogged husks ahead. The ocean hissed against the hive's outer walls. Entire districts lay submerged, and where avenues had once bustled with industry, only the slick gleam of water remained, broken here and there by shattered rooftops or the jut of drowned statuary. Chaos banners fluttered over the higher spires, lurid symbols daubed in gore and dye, leering down at the tide. The traitors had fortified the surviving levels above the waterline, turning hab spires into gun nests and manufactoria into fortresses. More critical still, the hive's upper reaches held the last functioning spaceport on this coast. Its towers, though battered and waterlogged, still offered landing fields and cargo lifts wide enough to move armor, supplies, and men. Seized by chaos, it had become their lifeline. Every drop of munitions, every reinforcement from orbit passed through those landing platforms. Their war machines also labored to restore the old void shield generator. If it succeeded, the spaceport would be untouchable from orbit, anchoring the traitor fleet and ensuring their grip on the planet. The Imperial fleet's guns alone could not dislodge them. Outside the drowned hive, the armies of the Astra Militarum massed in sodden trenches and waterlogged redoubts, waiting for the order to advance. For an assault to succeed, the void shield had to fall, and the enemy's command and control hub had to be shattered. Without that, the entire Imperial effort would bleed out against unbroken defenses. In 2 days' time, they would launch their assault, a grinding push into the city's outer districts. That was why the Spears had come, to strike deep, destroy the generator, and sever the enemy's command spine. And it was why the Hestian amphibious rifles swam at their side, to serve as pathfinders through the drowned arteries, clearing a silent way for the Emperor's armies. Vicato studied the waterlogged horizon, the gleam of the ruined hive broken by lightning. He spoke over the vox, his voice carrying the calm weight of ritual. "Brothers, we strike as one tide, trust the current, trust your kin. The Emperor is the reef upon which the storm will break." The Astartes around him, 10 warriors of obsidian plate, their armor worked with jade inlays and oceanic patterns, inclined their heads. None spoke. Their stillness was not silence but discipline, the gathering of breath before the plunge. To their right, the Hestian skimmer pulled closer. Major Dalen crouched near its prow, his rebreather mask pulled tight, a harpoon-like carbine slung across his chest. His men were shadows behind him, each clad in dull wetsuits beneath flak vests, their gear streamlined for swimming as much as for fighting. Dalen gave a brief hand signal. "On your lead, Spears." Vicato replied with the tilt of his helm. The craft nosed into the husk of a collapsed transit tunnel, its archways half submerged, barnacles crusting its edges. The machine spirit of the transport murmured in complaint as its engines dimmed to silence. The Obsidian Spears moved first. One by one they slid from the craft into the dark water. Even burdened with ceramite, they sank with ritual precision, stabilizers firing to slow their descent. Helm filters cut away the brackish tang, but the sense of weightless pressure pressed upon them. In the dark, their optics picked out the half-sunken necropolis in ghostly green. They swam not like men, but like predators, their armor's mass balanced by thruster packs and practiced efficiency. Each stroke was deliberate, each movement conserving momentum. Behind them, the Hestians entered as well, fins cutting silently, their weapons mag-locked until needed. Small strobes winked to life on their harnesses, barely visible in the gloom, a schooling of men following in the Astartes' wake. Somewhere deeper in the drowned arteries, a heavier resonance throbbed through the water. Too deep, too steady to be the rifles or spears. Waikato knew its source, ancient Tahu wading unseen, a leviathan in the dark. Together they moved deeper into the hive's arteries clogged with salt. The squad pressed deeper into the city, their path winding between rust-scabbed pillars and bridges, collapsed into the muck. Chaos sigils had been painted across the walls in dripping coils of black and crimson, their paint refusing to wash away even after years of tide and rain. Some symbols writhed faintly, like oil on the surface of water. Waikato felt the air change, not through his lungs. Those were sealed behind layers of armor and machine, but through something deeper, the bone-deep instinct of a Tuaruan mariner. The water seemed thicker here, pressing in, buzzing faintly against his skull. Warp taint. Rakanoa raised a fist. The column stilled even the Hestians, who hovered just below the waterline like predatory eels. "Contacts," said the sergeant. Ahead, a drowned plaza opened up. Once it had been a civic space, arches leading into the foundations of the upper hive, a broken statue rising from the mire. Now, it was a kill zone. Chaos patrols stalked the walkways above, their armor spiked and crusted with filth, their eyes burning with the cruel light of possession. Below them, mutants waded the waters, dragging chains and rusted blades, their mouths stretched too wide, teeth sharpened to razors. Waikato leaned close to Rakanoa. "They'll hear bolter fire too quickly. Hestians first, quiet." He gave the barest nod in response. The amphibious rifles slid forward, rising from the water like the spirits of the drowned. One scaled the statue in silence, hauling himself hand over hand with a knife clamped in his teeth. Another eased up behind a mutant waist-deep in the shallows. A blade flashed, a throat parted, and the body slumped without a sound. 3 more went down in moments, throats cut or spines severed with surgical precision. No words, no cries, only ripples. Waikato braced himself, weapon tight against his chest. He watched one Hestian pause at the base of a ladder, his hand raised in signal, and a thought passed through him. Sharks, he thought, cold, efficient, untroubled by conscience. The quiet did not last. A Chaos patrolman turned too soon, his eyes finding the faint wake in the water. He shouted a guttural alarm. Autoguns spat tracer fire into the murk. "Spears!" Waikato barked. The Obsidian Spears rose as one, black armored giants surging from the water. Bolters thundered in reply, their mass-reactive shells detonating with concussive force. The plaza erupted into chaos, tracer rounds splintering concrete, bodies bursting apart. Waikato fired rapid single shots, his bolter punching holes through armor and flesh alike. Beside him, Rakanoa's blade flashed with each pull of the trigger, cutting down those too close. The Hestians worked in pairs, firing and moving in turns as they swept through the position. The Chaos line shattered beneath the combined assault. A Vox operator tried to scream into his comms for help, but a bolt round burst his head apart. A heavy stubber jammed, and its wielder tried to flee, only to be cut down. The Hestians struck from below, silent knives taking throats. The spears thundered above them, bolters roaring. Yet even as the last patrolman fell, Waikato felt the air press tighter. The buzzing in his helm grew sharper, like teeth against glass. The plaza was only the threshold. Deeper currents waited ahead. He gestured the strike team on. "No pause, we strike before they rally." A figure moved forward from the Hestian ranks, a shadow among shadows. It was Major Dalen, his voice a low hiss over the Vox. "Cut the throats, rifles, before the bastards scream." Waikato followed, water lapping at his knees as the squad pressed into the hive's sunken arteries. Part 2, the Crimson Mark. The drowned district lay in silence, broken only by the hiss of rain across the water and the hollow groan of a tide-warped hab block collapsing somewhere deeper inland. The Obsidian Spears moved first, their black and jade armor slicing through the gloom, helms sealed, weapons low but ready. Behind them, the Hestians followed in disciplined files, las rifles trained on every shattered archway and broken bridge. Their fins cut the floodwater cleanly, each movement precise, each heartbeat measured. Once a commercial quarter, market vaults, transit hubs, rows of worker tenements, it had become a labyrinth of collapsed ferrocrete and half-flooded plazas, where slick chemical colors pooled in the floodwater, shifting with every cautious step. Paint, dyes, and industrial oils combined to create shifting reflections that made it difficult to gauge depth. One misstep could mean a drowned death in the hidden recesses of the ruined hive. Vicato raised a clenched fist. The column halted at the shadow of a ruined transit station, its glass canopies shattered long ago. A crude totem of nailed bone and paint-daubed scrap metal leaned against the entrance. The sign of the dark gods had been daubed repeatedly across the stone, as if the heretics sought to erase any memory of what had stood before. "Here," he voxed, calm, measured, his voice carrying the ritual weight of authority. "Hestians, secure the outer cordon, spears with me." The Hestian officer lifted his hand in a precise salute, fingers tracing a ritualistic symbol over the brow of his helm. "Yes, sir. We'll watch the tide and hold the line until your blade passes." The slight nod that accompanied it was full of unspoken confidence, a practiced ritual of command that bespoke a culture of warriors bred for stealth and endurance. The Hestians split smoothly, two squads scaling the upper floors of surrounding ruins, another slipping into the station itself. The spears pressed down the central concourse, shadows of immense warriors beneath fractured vaulting. Every footfall, every pulse of their ceramite-weighted muscles was calibrated, silent against the still water. Then the first fire erupted. Autogun bursts shredded the concourse, whining off marble facades. A Hestian cried out, spun, and splashed into the murky water. The others snapped into reaction, las bolts cutting precise lines of death through the gloom. "Contact front." Vicato's reply was action. He surged forward, bolter roaring. A heretic's head exploded in a crimson and yellow spray. Another fell, clutching his chest, choking on his own fluids. The warriors spread, disciplined fire sweeping for fresh threats, their teal lenses scanning every corner, every shadow. The chemical sheen of spilled dyes reflected in their optics, creating ghostly specters that might have fooled a less trained eye. Inside the station, a concealed crossfire struck the Hestians as they cleared the upper platforms. Two were struck down immediately, their bodies spinning into the floodwater with sickening finality. Their sergeant barked the order to take cover, voice hoarse but firm, cutting through panic like a blade. Then came heavier fire. A belt-fed stubber mounted in the wreckage spat a relentless hail of rounds, tearing through the outer supports. Where two Hestians crouched, rounds found them. They sank into the flood without a sound, water washing over them as if to erase the traces of their deaths. "Raukaro, suppress," Vicato commanded. Raukaro stepped into the open, calm as carved stone. Bolter fire spat vengeance, each round detonating heretics into pulp. The stubber coughed, jammed, smoked. Another heretic loosed a single lucky shot. Raukaro stiffened, swayed, and sank heavily into the floodwater. "Brother down," intoned another warrior, voice flat, gaze locked on the next target. There was no tremor in the tone, but the weight of death pressed into the air. The squad closed ranks over Raukaro's body, moving as if the world itself had shifted beneath their feet. By the time the station was cleared, 5 Hestians lay dead along with Raukaro. The survivors quickly gathered what they could of the fallen and concealed the bodies beneath rubble and chemical-slicked waters, taking care to mask signs of outside interference. Smoke, debris, and shifting shadows turned the aftermath into a convincing tale of internal cult conflict, leaving their presence undetected. Vaikato crouched over Raukaro's body, gloved hand resting briefly on the fallen brother's shoulder. The gesture was older than memory, an unspoken ritual of respect and remembrance. Vaikato's gaze lingered on the drowned forms of the Hestians. They were mortal, but they had not faltered. In his mind, he marked them as kin claimed by the tide. "The tide takes, the tide gives," murmured Major Dalen. "They will not be wasted." Vaikato looked to the Hestian. "We move on," he said. The Hestian nodded once, eyes reflecting the flickering reflections of the chemical slicks. "We move on," he echoed, voice carrying the steady cadence of trained endurance. The floodwater rose as the strike team pressed deeper into the drowned hive. A measured, deliberate, rhythmic thrum beneath their boots made the survivors pause, a distant building settling, or something larger. A Hestian muttered about thunder. Another feared the ruins were collapsing beneath them. One of the Spears warriors, voice quiet but certain, said, "It is neither." Vaikato's helm turned toward the drowned horizon. Beneath the water, something vast stirred unseen, the weight of it pressing at the edges of his perception. High above the drowned districts, the central spire of Hive Thalassar still clawed at the storm. Its upper halls, once bastions of governance, now burned with profane light. Crimson banners dripped rain from shattered balconies, and the air stank of oil and incense. Into this throne of ruin strode Malkurian, his black-crimson warplate etched with living runes, acolytes scattering before his gaze. The central spire of Hive Thalassar had become his court. Malkurian moved through its shattered halls with the certainty of a crowned lord, crimson and black warplate flickering with unstable runes that cast their own malign glow. Acolytes bent or scurried at his approach, their babbled reports of cult skirmishes and petty blood dews silenced by his mere presence. Such scraps of discord meant little to him. His design stretched far beyond the drowned hive. He spoke of tides that would rise higher still, of a conquest measured not in districts but in worlds. Where others preached, he commanded. Where others raved, he ruled. A single acolyte dared to speculate about the latest skirmish within the hive. "A spat among the lower bands, my lord, perhaps." "Perhaps?" Malkurian's Crozius hummed faintly, runes flaring. His voice was silk over steel. "No, not mere infighting. Outsiders move among us, surgical, merciless." He moved closer to a splintered wall, fingertips brushing the surface where a last bolt had scarred stone. Chemical stains ran like veins beneath his fingers. The faint ghost of a bolter's report lingered in his senses, a whisper of distant fury. He traced the lines through the puddles of water, following the invisible currents of strategy. A small force, calculated, covert. They have used the waterways, they have left no trace but death, and yet evidence remains. His eyes narrowed, taking in the pattern of casualties, the positioning of debris, the chemical slicks. Imperial, Mechanicus saboteurs, Adeptus Astartes, perhaps. The hunt had begun, but the quarry did not yet know they were being hunted. Malkurian's lips twitched into a faint, predatory grin. He would wait. To strike now would be crude. Better to let the intruders press deeper, where the hive itself would strangle their every movement, and his net could close unseen. Around him, acolytes whispered, noting the rising storm outside, the shudder of the drowned spires. But Malkurian's focus was absolute, a singular awareness tracing every detail, every mark of violence and stealth, until the day he would meet these invaders on his terms. Part 3. The Wrath Below. Major Dalen's sub-teams had moved ahead hours before, threading and dispersing through a narrow sector of the drowned district. Their orders were simple. Chart a submerged artery through the commercial quarter. Mark the path for armor columns yet to come. Water lapped around their knees, carrying the acrid tang of rusted metal, mold, and chemical runoff. Every step splashed against submerged rubble, each echo bouncing through hollowed ferrocrete corridors. The ruined halls seemed to hold their breath. A flicker of movement caught Dalen's eye. Behind a collapsed doorway, pale armor glinted faintly under the dim skylight. Spiked pauldrons, demon-etched helms. Traitor Astartes. Dalen's pulse quickened. He barely had time to register the enemy before the ambush erupted. Explosions tore through the corridor, sending shards of metal and masonry into the brackish water. One of his pathfinders, Private Lyra, screamed as shrapnel shredded her thigh, pitching her into the flood. Sergeant Kellis's right arm exploded under a concussive fragment. Bone and tendons hung in a grotesque tangle, a traumatic amputation. He clawed at the floor, gurgling, but the tide claimed him. Dalen scrambled behind a submerged beam, grit and water stinging his eyes. Shrapnel ricocheted across the corridor, biting at flesh and armor alike. Another explosion threw him against a pillar, ribs scraping, a jagged laceration cutting across his torso. "Move!" he hissed, voice strained, but the vox dissolved into static. High-pitched interference from the word-bearers rendered communication useless. The corridor, once a path to reconnaissance, had become a death trap. Private Kale attempted to dash toward a collapsed stairwell, hoping to gain higher ground or flee, but a hail of fire shredded the water around him. His body went rigid, then sank, leaving only a chaotic ripple in his wake. Dalen's chest tightened. Panic pressed at the edges of his discipline, but there was no time for grief. Lyra, wounded and bleeding, made a final desperate crawl toward him. Dalen reached out, fingers brushing against the private's torn uniform, but another detonation shattered the floor between them. She disappeared beneath the tide, a trail of bubbles the only testament to his struggle. A word-bearer emerged from a side doorway, stepping into view like a predator assessing a cornered prey. Calm, deliberate, it raised its bolt pistol. Dalen lunged, dragging his broken waterlogged body toward the nearest cover, a half-collapsed stairwell, but the floor betrayed him. Splinters and jagged metal tore into his legs, slowing him, each stroke of movement agony. Shrapnel embedded itself in his torso and limbs. His left arm twisted at an impossible angle. Bone protruded through armor, nerves aflame with pain. Adrenaline burned through the fog in his mind, fueling one final act of defiance. With his right hand, he grabbed a fragment of rubble and hurled it at the approaching word-bearer, hitting the corner of its helm. The enemy did not falter. The fragment bounced harmlessly off, and Dalen's momentum failed. He sank lower into the floodwater, every breath a labor. Pain lanced through him with each movement, yet he continued dragging himself forward, ignoring the cold numbness creeping through his legs. For a heartbeat, he glimpsed the sky through the ruined ceiling, thought of his homeworld, of comrades he would never see again. His vision blurred. Blood, water, and debris mingled into a single, indistinguishable tide. The word-bearer advanced, measured, unhurried. Another blast threw Dalen sideways, the current catching him and spinning his body helplessly. Limbs flailed. His screams were swallowed by the water. One final surge, one desperate stretch toward a sliver of cover, and he collapsed face down into the murky tide. Silence reclaimed the corridor. Only the gentle, rippling lapping of water remained, carrying the scent of blood, burnt metal, and chemical detritus. The sub-team had been annihilated, erased from the sector, leaving behind nothing but the faintest traces of their presence. High above, in a reinforced chamber carved into the drowned hive's spire, Malkurian observed. His eyes traced the ripples and the scattered debris, noting the subtle disturbances in water and air. One sub-team gone, the corridors, quiet again, held the faint chemical tang of blood. Every missed step, every hesitation by the Hestians had been exploited. Malkurian leaned back, allowing himself a thin smile. The ambush had been executed with perfect precision. He did not need to worry about the corpse god's Astartes strike team for the moment. Their path would bring them into his web in due course. The destruction of one of the teams was a message, both for intruders and for his enemies. The city belonged to him, and trespassers would not survive its shadows. A muted drum sounded beneath layers of water and stone as he traced the disturbances left behind. Not through words, but through the subtle displacements. The spread of chemical stains, the disturbed ripples on flooded floors, the ghostly outline of bodies swept aside. Malkurian measured his victory. Outside, the bombardment continued. Imperial batteries on the surrounding hills fired relentlessly, metal and fire punching against the void-shielded city. The shield held firm, rendering their fury impotent, the tide of destruction rebounding harmlessly off its invisible barrier. Inside, only silence reigned, broken occasionally by the drip of stagnant water or the distant moan of warped ferrocrete. Let the Imperials hammer the void shield until their barrels melted. The shield would hold. The city was his altar, and every corpse within it a sacrifice. Malkurian's gaze lingered, detached, clinical. The Obsidian Spears would move through this city, oblivious to the trap he had set. The tide would bring them to him on his terms, and when they arrived, they would find precision where they had expected chaos, and inevitability where they had hoped for fortune. Part 4. The Price of Victory. The Obsidian Spears advanced deeper into the drowned city, their progress a silent, measured glide through the flooded avenues. Water, a dark mirror of the sky above, lapped against their ceramite greaves, each ripple a testament to the oppressive silence of the hive command quarter. Rakanoa led the way, his chainblade's teeth humming with a barely perceptible vibration that spoke of readiness. The air grew colder, thick with the scent of ozone and the subtle metallic tang of blood that no amount of chemical runoff could mask. Vaikato followed, his mind a steel trap of strategic calculations. Their objective was clear: locate and destroy the void shield generator. The Hestians, the Pathfinders, were to have been their eyes and ears in the submerged arteries. But the last comms check had returned only silence, a void that had been growing for hours. They might be busy. After all, their mission required absolute silence. But Vaikato had a mariner's instinct for the currents of battle. Silence was not always a sign of success. He glanced at his auspex, but it remained clear: no friendly signals in the sectors where the Hestians had been dispatched. He pushed the thought aside. He had a mission to complete. As they pressed on, the silence was broken. A low thrum, a vibration that resonated through the water and into their boots, grew steadily louder. It was a rhythmic pulse, a beat that was both mechanical and utterly alive. It was the heart of the void shield generator, its immense power a constant bass-heavy hum that promised defiance. They reached the perimeter of the command complex. Here, the architecture was more intact, a series of colossal reinforced pillars and arches built to withstand planetary bombardment. The air tasted of pure energy. Vaikato's helm augers shrieked a warning as he looked up. A patrol of word-bearers moved across the walkways above, their spiked armor and crude banners unmistakable. Rakanoa raised his gauntlet, halting the column. He gestured for the squad to take cover behind a collapsed archway. "They are in position," he voxed, his voice a low hiss. "They know we are here. The trap is set." The patrol above them paused, their helms sweeping the area. They were not just patrols, they were hunters. Vaikato gripped his bolter, fingers tightening on the trigger. He could feel the eyes of the word-bearers on them, even from a distance. The silence had been a feint. They had walked into a snare. "Spears from the deep," Vaikato barked. The Obsidian Spears surged from cover, but the word-bearers' initial volley was a distraction. Their true ambush came from the flanks, from concealed positions in the half-sunken wreckage. Two word-bearers, their forms obscured by the haze, opened fire from a covered platform, a heavy bolter chewing through the ruins with a deafening roar. Chants to their dark gods droned between bursts of fire. Brother Liko, a heavy weapons specialist, was caught in the open. A fusillade of rounds hammered against his pauldron, cracking the ceramite before a final concussive round tore through his helm, extinguishing the light in his eyes. He crumpled into the water without a sound, his body a heavy weight in the murky tide. Another spear, Haraki, fell as a melter charge, expertly placed, detonated behind him. The blast wave flung him forward, his armor superheated and twisted, his form a silent, broken testament to the enemy's cunning. The Obsidian Spears' discipline held firm, even as a third word-bearer, a hulking figure wielding a corrupted plasma gun, stepped from the shadows. The weapon spat a searing beam of energy, forcing Vaikato to dive for cover. The remaining spears reacted with disciplined fury. Vaikato roared a command, his chainblade shrieking as he closed the distance on the plasma gunner. Rakanoa and the others returned fire, their bolters a punishing staccato against the enemy's barrage. The fight was swift, brutal, and utterly without mercy. The word-bearer's position was overwhelmed, their bodies joining the fallen in the brackish water. Vaikato's hearts hammered against his ribs as he helped the other spears gather their dead. There was no time for lament. The mission was paramount. They pressed on following the humming thrum of the generator. They burst into the command center, a massive echoing chamber that reeked of ozone and blood. The space was filled not with hardened Chaos Space Marines, but with a meager force of cultists and a handful of Astartes-sized cult officers. They were armed with las pistols and rusted swords, their eyes filled with a fanaticism born of false hope. The cultists' screams rose not in panic but in verse, fractured hymns to the dark gods that echoed from wall to wall. They did not retreat, they charged, a wave of human fodder against the black and teal ceramite. Vaikato signaled for a breach, and the spears flowed into the chamber, their movements a choreographed dance of death. They moved in pairs, a fire team covering the advance of another. Vaikato and Mirai took the first door, their bolters sweeping across the room. He fired a single controlled burst, shredding 2 cultists at once. Mirai, following, covered his flank, his fire precise and deadly. They cleared the room in sections, using principles of close-quarters battle almost as old as firearms. One spear would lay down suppressive fire while the other moved to a new position. They moved from cover to cover, their disciplined approach making the fight a one-sided slaughter. The cultists' desperate charges were met with silent, methodical destruction. They were not even a challenge, they were simply an obstacle to be removed. Rakanoa moved with brutal efficiency, his chain blade tearing through the cult officers as if they were made of paper. The cultists' blood splattered across the floor, pooling in the floodwater. Vaikato watched, a cold dread creeping into his soul. This was too easy. He turned to the void shield generator, a massive, pulsating machine at the center of the room. The cultists had been meant to die. Their blood, their desperate fear, their final gasps, all of it was an offering. A ritual sacrifice. This was no ambush. It was a carefully orchestrated ceremony. The unseen enemy commander had wanted this fight. He had provided the meat for the grinder, the blood for the ritual. The spears had been used, their fury a tool to fuel a dark purpose. Vaikato's hand, now possessed with grim fury, planted a melter charge at the generator's base. He felt no triumph, only a grim determination. The void shield, its immense body humming with defiant energy, was the objective. He thumbed the detonator. The generator shrieked one last time, a high-pitched wail that seemed to rend the air itself. The energy dome above the city rippled, wavered, and then vanished. Above, in the sky, 1,000 Imperial ships held their fire for a moment, as their gunnery officers passed orders to retarget the hive below. Then, with a roar that echoed across the entire planet, the first volleys of macro-cannon fire tore through the atmosphere, heading for the hive below. The siege had truly begun. Vaikato felt no triumph, only the grim certainty that they had just traded one battle for a war. They were trapped deep in enemy territory, the element of surprise gone. The void shield was down, but its destruction was a beacon to every enemy patrol in the city. The Hestians were gone, their silence a testament to their fate. The spears were alone, their numbers thinned, and the counterattack they knew was coming, its terrible purpose now clear. Part 5. The Price of Apotheosis. The void shield generator pulsed once, shuddered, and died. On the surface, the sky cracked open with Imperial fury. Macro cannon shells, torpedoes, and lances of pure energy tore through the atmosphere, slamming into the hive's exposed defenses. The ground beneath the spear's boots trembled, their ceramite rattling, but inside the command chamber, only the echo of the void shield's demise lingered. A new tide rose on the city's mud-choked shores. Across vast plazas and collapsed causeways, the massed ranks of the Astra Militarum began their charge. Thousands of infantry and armored columns pushed through the brackish water, their battle cry for the Emperor, a desperate, valiant bellow against the chaos. Breaches appeared in the outer wall, torn open by orbital ordnance, and into these wounds the Imperial Guard poured. But the word-bearers were not broken. From crumbling bastions and shattered spires, they responded with a storm of their own. Their cannon beams, the size of a man's torso, lanced down, swatting aside Imperial tanks like flies. Heavy bolter fire scythed through the charging ranks, and the Loyalists began to fall by the hundreds, their screams swallowed by the deafening thunder of war. In response, tank and cannon fire began to impact on the traitor positions, pummeling turrets and redoubts. The air between the two sides was full of shot, light, and fire. The Spear's own struggle was but a footnote to the grand violence. Within the command chamber, the ruined generator steamed, its corpse humming with residual power as fresh enemies poured in. From shattered doorways and buckled conduits came hardened word-bearers, their crimson and black armor defiled with scripture, their vox grills roaring with liturgies. Possessed followed, bodies twisted beyond recognition, and a mass of cultists shrieking praise to the dark gods swarmed in their wake. "For Lorgar, for the true gods," a guttural voice roared. Around the ruined generator, the remaining spears formed a desperate circle. Bolters spat death into the onrushing tide. Vicato's chainblade sang a song of defiance, carving a path through the first wave. Rakanoa fought beside him, his combat blade a blur as the enemy closed. But the sheer numbers were overwhelming them. The word-bearers were a tide, relentless and uncaring of their own losses. They crashed against the spears, turning the battle into a desperate maelstrom of ceramite and corrupted flesh. A possessed tore into Brother Marai, its mutated claws ripping his pauldron. Marai's bolter emptied into its chest at point-blank range, but the monstrosity shrugged it off, slamming him against a pillar. With a sickening crunch, it ripped his arm from its socket. He fell, his blood as slick in the floodwater. Brother Kalen fought valiantly, his chainsword a blur, but he was surrounded. 3 word-bearers descended on him. He killed 2 before a power axe split his helm, sending him crashing to his knees, his life bleeding into the water. Rakanoa, fighting like a force of nature, was pushed back. He parried a furious blow from a word-bearer champion, his blade sparking against the traitors. The champion was relentless, its eyes burning with a cold, malevolent light. Vicato, seeing his brother in peril, plunged into the fray. He parried a blow meant for Rakanoa's back, then thrust, driving his blade into the traitor's gut. A second traitor rammed into Vicato, knocking him off his feet and into the water. He struggled to rise, his vision blurred. The spears were being systematically broken. Their disciplined formation was shattered, individual warriors fighting for their lives. The blood offering had been made. The air thickened with the stench of their spilt blood, a potent offering to the dark gods. Vicato shouted into his vox once more, a desperate open-channel cry. "Tahu, in the command center, void shield down. We are under heavy assault, requesting immediate support. Repeat, immediate support." His words, strained and edged with finality, echoed into the void. A presence entered the chamber, silencing even the roaring word-bearers. From a newly rent fissure in the far wall, a figure strode, radiating dark power. Crimson and black armor glowed with an unholy light, runes burning across its surface. His Crozius, wreathed in dark energy, pulsed with malevolent power. It was Malcurian. He walked as though the carnage were his due, his gaze sweeping the ruined chamber. Around him the chanting of cultists swelled. His voice rose above it, rich and venomous. "I must pass on my thanks to you, Obsidian Spears. Every drop of your blood, every fallen follower of your corpse emperor outside these walls, every sacrifice was mine. Your courage, your discipline, your refusal to bend, all of it bought me this moment." He raised his Crozius, and the chamber convulsed. The air shimmered, saturated with screams, with the fear of mortals and the fury of dying Astartes. The spears felt it, felt their brothers' deaths being used, twisted into fuel for something greater. The floor beneath his feet cracked as raw warp energy surged into his form. His armor groaned and burst open as new monstrous limbs tore through. Horns sprouted from his helm, wings of leathery flesh unfurled from his back, tearing at the ceiling. His Crozius transformed into a demonically possessed blade, longer, sharper, and dripping with unholy power. The ritual was complete. Malkurian was no longer a mere chaos space marine. He was ascending. The Obsidian Spears watched in horrified awe as he became a demon prince. Malkurian, now a towering, monstrous entity, turned his blazing eyes on Vaikato. "You were the instruments of my elevation, little warriors. Your defiance fueled my ascension. Now, you will be my first offering to the Pantheon." He raised his demon blade, its edge humming with destructive power. Just as the demon prince prepared to strike, the ground beneath them shook. Not from the distant bombardment, nor from Malkurian's power, but from a tremor deeper within the hive. An ancient promise of steel and fury, a roar, guttural and deep, like the breaking of a leviathan from the abyssal depths, echoed through the command center. From a side conduit, a massive ancient form burst forth. Rust-streaked ceramite, barnacle-encrusted metal, and a single glowing eye lens. It was Tahu, the Obsidian Spears' ancient dreadnought. His chassis groaned as he moved, a living tank of wrath and firepower, a silent, unforeseen variable that had just entered the equation. Malkurian's head snapped to face the newcomer. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed his monstrous features. A relic? Here? Impossible! This was anathema to his calculations, an unpredicted variable. Tahu did not pause. He advanced, his heavy flamer shrieking to life, spitting a torrent of promethium. He swept it over the hordes of word-bearers before him, reducing them to shrieking, stumbling candles. Tahu's voice, a gravelly rumble of pure, righteous fury, echoed through the chamber. "That's quite enough of this nonsense, thank you." With a contemptuous roar, Malkurian turned his blazing fury on the dreadnought. "I will break you, Ancient. I will grind your bones to dust." He brought his demon blade down in a wide arc, aiming to cleave Tahu's chassis in two. Tahu met the blow with his massive power fist, the two blows colliding with the force of a tectonic shift. The impact sent a shockwave that blew the surrounding word-bearers and spears off their feet. The air was filled with the deafening clang of ceramite and the shriek of malevolent energy. Malkurian's blade bit deep into the dreadnought's armor, sending sparks flying. Tahu's fist, meanwhile, sent cracks across the demon prince's arm, forcing him to recoil with a pained hiss. Tahu followed, his fist pounding Malkurian's face like a pneumatic hammer. The battle had become a duel between titans. Tahu's ancient, resolute fury against Malkurian's raw, chaotic power. Neither gave ground. Malkurian struck with speed and terrible, unholy power, his wings allowing him to dodge and weave. Tahu fought with the slow, methodical ferocity of an earth mover, his every blow a cataclysm. Vaikato, seeing his ancient locked in a deathmatch, pulled himself from the wreckage. His left arm was a ruin, bent at an unnatural angle. He felt no pain, only a cold, burning rage. He dragged himself across the waterlogged floor, his bolter lost. He drew his combat blade, his single good arm trembling with effort. He saw his chance. Malkurian, still focused on Tahu's brute force, left an opening. Vaikato lunged, driving his blade into the thick hide of the demon prince's thigh, where the armor had been ruptured by a previous blow. Malkurian roared in pain and fury. The attack was minor but a profound insult. He swatted Vaikato away like a gnat. The blow sent Vaikato careening into a pile of ruined machinery, his armor groaning and splintering. Vaikato felt an agonizing jolt as his right leg snapped. Tahu, seeing Vaikato fall, roared with renewed fury. He redirected his flamer from Malkurian's chest to his head, forcing the demon prince to duck and recoil. The distraction was enough. Rakanoa, now clear of the melee, charged the demon with his chain blade roaring a battle cry. Sparks showered, ceramite groaned. Malkurian struck with furious speed, his wings beating, his blade slicing deep. Tahu fought like the reef, immovable, each strike a hammer blow that split the air. For a heartbeat it seemed the old war machine could hold. But Malkurian pressed harder. His demon blade slashed through Tahu's sarcophagus casing, sending molten shards of ceramite spiraling into the flood. A second strike severed one of his weapon arms in a shriek of tortured steel. Tahu staggered. His vox crackled static. He swung again, defiant, smashing the demon's wing with his fist. Bone snapped, ichor sprayed, and Malkurian roared in fury. Yet the dreadnought reeled, half-collapsed, his frame burning. "I endure," Tahu growled, even as sparks vomited from his ruined chassis. "I have endured for centuries, and I will endure long after you are gone." Malkurian snarled, wounded but triumphant. With a contemptuous sweep, he cast the crippled dreadnought back against the wall. Rubble fell, half burying the ancient. "Endure in silence, then," the demon prince spat, wings flaring as he turned his gaze back to the broken spears. "Your relic lies in ruin. Your kin are corpses. You will not stop me." Part 6. The Price of a Soul. The command chamber was a shattered ruin, a testament to the cataclysmic battle that had erupted within it. Malkurian wrenched his blade free of Tahu's chest, molten ceramite hissing as the dreadnought sagged beneath the weight of the rubble. Before the demon prince could strike again, Raikkonoa broke from cover with a wordless bellow, chainblade revving. He hurled himself at the monster, a single warrior against a creature that had eclipsed mortality. He struck true. The chainblade bit deep into Malkurian's flank, spraying black ichor across the floor. But the demon's laughter was a sound of pure malice. Malkurian seized Raikkonoa in one clawed hand and slammed him against the shattered wall, stone cracking from the impact. "You think yourself my equal," the demon sneered, lifting him high. With a contemptuous twist, Malkurian hurled him to the floor hard enough to crack the marble beneath. Raikkonoa tried to rise, gauntlet scrabbling for his fallen blade, but the demon's foot came down, crushing him into the stone. Armor split, blood sprayed, and Raikkonoa went still, his helm's teal glow snuffed out. For a heartbeat, the chamber was silent, but for the hiss of steam and Malkurian's ragged breathing. Vaikato, broken and bloodied, dragged himself upright against the rubble. His body was wrecked, his weapons gone, but his eyes remained fixed on Malkurian as he stalked over to where Tahu was attempting to rise. For a heartbeat, despair threatened. But in that same heartbeat, Vaikato acted. His weapons were gone, his body broken, but his will was not. With a guttural roar, he heaved a piece of jagged rubble from the floor, a broken chunk of ceramite the size of his fist, and hurled it with every last ounce of his strength. The throw was desperate, a final spiteful act of defiance. Against all odds, it flew true. The rock, a mere fragment of a dead world, smacked Malkurian directly in the eye. It didn't pierce his hide or even draw ichor, but the sheer unexpectedness of the act, the audacity of a mortal striking at a god, was enough. The demon prince screamed, a sound of fury and outrage that tore at the air. He reeled, pouring at the eye that now wept a thin smoking trail of warp fire, and glared at Vaikato. Malkurian's helm canted, runes glowing like embers. "Still you stand," he said, voice heavy with dark amusement. "Bleeding, broken, barnacles clinging to a sinking hull. But the tide is mine, little warriors, and it comes to claim you." In that stolen moment, Tahu's eye lens flickered back to life. Smoke poured from his cracked sarcophagus casing, but his voice rolled out across the chamber, dry as salt on the wind. "Oh, I wouldn't say that." From the ruin of his chest, a dull green light pulsed. A teleport beacon, its signal clear now that the void shield was gone. "You didn't think I came all this way just to trade fists with this warp-addled fool, did you?" Tahu growled, almost smug. "Time to remind the heretic what it means to face the reef." The beacon's light flared. Reality screamed. With a thunderclap of displaced air and ozone, the chamber filled with giants. Obsidian armored terminators materialized in a crackle of lightning, storm bolters barking the moment they solidified. At their head strode Coata, his chain fist dripping with energy, Stormbolter bucking as he advanced with inexorable purpose. His vox carried calm finality. "High tide, brothers, break them!" Beside them came the true hammer. 3 more dreadnoughts, ancient engines of wrath, their chassis marked with centuries of battle scars. Assault cannons spun up. Plasma cannons spat searing light. Power fists swung like wrecking balls. The word-bearers had a heartbeat to scream before they were annihilated. Cultists were reduced to ash in sheets of fire. Possessed were torn apart by stormbolter fusillades. The remaining traitor Astartes were crushed beneath the iron fists of the walking tombs. Malkurian staggered under the storm, but he did not yield. Warp fire wreathed his claws as he tore a Terminator in half, armor and flesh bursting in a spray of molten jade and red. Another charged, Stormbolter blazing, only to be engulfed in a torrent of witch flame, his screams echoing as his armor bubbled and split. With a roar of defiance, the demon prince heaved his blade through the chest of a dreadnought, rending metal like parchment, sparks cascading as the ancient engine toppled. For a moment it seemed the ritual's promise would hold, that even incomplete, his godhood could not be denied. But the tide closed in. Coata struck low, his sword slicing through Malkurian's thigh in a storm of ichor and black smoke. Another dreadnought seized the demon's sword arm, locking it in a grip that even warp-spawned sinew could not break. A third hammered into his torso, pinning him as storm bolters and power fists hammered home. The reef closed around him, unyielding, inexorable. The warp fire that had sustained him guttered. His ascension had been bought with blood and sacrifice, but it was incomplete, fragile, and now the weight of ancient vengeance bore down upon him. "No," Malkurian howled, writhing against the spear's iron grip. "I will not fall, I will not—" He never finished. The warp clawed him back. His form flickered, cracked, and was pulled screaming into the immaterium, leaving only the stench of ozone and scorched ichor in his wake. Silence fell. The chamber, once a maelstrom of blood and fire, was now a fortress of blackened jade armor. Coata stood over Vicato, his immense form blotting out the crackling light from the ruined chamber. He knelt, the plates of his Terminator armor groaning softly, and his hand, the one not holding the chain fist, gently lifted Vicato's head. He checked the brother's life signs, his vox grill a blur of barely contained data. "You live, brother." Coata's voice, usually a cold statement of fact, held a low note of relief. Vicato coughed a ragged sound. "Are you sure?" "I'm not convinced." He looked at the smoking wreck of the dreadnought half buried in the wall. "Tahu." Tahu's vox crackled as he finished freeing himself from the rubble, his broken form still spewing sparks and smoke. "Still here, young Vicato. You should see the other one, or, you know, the empty spot where he was." He rumbled, a sound that was half static and half chuckle. Coata simply turned from Vicato to Tahu, his gaze sweeping over the two of them. The two survivors, his brothers. He didn't speak the words, but they were there in the quiet way he looked upon them. The reef holds. Join the Discord, link in description. Don't forget to click like, comment, and subscribe if you have enjoyed this story.